where history's shadows cast long, unsettling doubts, the truth lies buried. From cryptic wartime codes to assassinations that scarred generations, unearth the secrets the world tried to forget. Host Tim Gardner guides you through a labyrinth of unanswered questions where every clue pulses with danger and intrigue, and perhaps an opinion or two. It's not all facts because history never is. Welcome to the Ciphered Past.
Welcome, everybody, to a new episode of Ciphered Past. I am Tim Gardner. This is episode 17. Tonight, I am honored to be joined by, I'm super honored. Not only have I talked to you, both these people on X before, but I'm just thrilled to have them on the show. And the creators of the documentary Fort Die Trying are on with us tonight. Real quick before we start on the podcast, Eli is out this evening. He will be back with us this next episode. But again, I am so thrilled to have John, Kirby, and Libby in tonight with us. Welcome to the show. Welcome to Ciphered Past.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you for having us.
Yeah.
Sorry, I just had to move a dog.
No problem.
Okay.
No problem. So with Fort Die Trying, again, a series that came out in 2023. Am I right, John?
Yes, the first installment of what is a series of documentary feature films hit it for the 60th anniversary of JFK's assassination in 2023. That's right.
Well, congratulations on the high reviews. I see a 9.1 on IMDb, a really high rating on there. Audiences also love it. The feedback from the X users, too, they absolutely brag about the show. So you guys have a lot to be proud of. And like I said, I am super thrilled that you both are on with us tonight. So our audience is going to get a nice education tonight. Absolutely. Well, where do we start? There's a lot of stuff to talk about. I think for me, my big mission is on things when it comes to the JFK case. Obviously, I focus squarely on that, but I can never undermine, obviously, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, and Robert Kennedy. You know, the thing for me about JFK's assassination, I feel like, and I'll give you my take, and then you guys can branch off this, is I feel like we've been caught under this spell since 1963, right? I know that things were happening prior to that, but our elected president was assassinated in broad daylight, and it looked like it was just a humiliating death, in my opinion, by the way that he had passed away. And we've never really been able to recover, whether it's strung down from the Vietnam War to the assassinations that you both have covered. To the younger people right now that don't know the significance of this, okay, and they think that it was just 62 years ago, what would you tell them?
Sure.
I mean, I think that the first place to start on it is that so many things that have happened today probably would never have happened, starting with the Vietnam War, if Kennedy had not been assassinated in 63. And the Vietnam War ruins this country in many, many ways that we have not come out of and never will. It put us on a much different trajectory historically, socially, politically, and in so many different ways. And I think it's we can't even really know, what would have happened. And of course, then it's followed by the assassinations of Martin Luther King and Malcolm X and Bobby Kennedy. And of course, if all of those people had lived they might have been able to push forward what Kennedy's agenda was. But once Kennedy was assassinated, we were going to go into Vietnam. And that's the real crux of the whole problem in terms of the latter part of the 20th century and now into the 21st century.
And I'll add to that even French intelligence, we happen to know, viewed Bobby as the kind of last best hope for America. And they actually caused to be published a book called Farewell America. They were able to get their hands on a copy of the Zapruder film and make that available to the prosecutor Jim Garrison, who, the district attorney of New Orleans, who was bringing really the only criminal trial that's ever been brought in the Kennedy case. And they felt that that was it. Like you saw the slide into, as Libby describes, the Vietnam War and a kind of social breakdown, and they thought that Bobby was like that light that was emerging that maybe could turn it around. And then when he was killed, they just they wrote a whole book about and published it under a pseudonym that just kind of told us, the American people and the rest of the world, what they felt had just happened to America, which was kind of the end. So, I mean, I don't want to be doom and gloom, because there's always hope, right? But it was, a very a tragic series of events that kind of solidified the place of the military industrial intelligence complex, various other elite systems of control, banking, the technocracy, et cetera. So, that was the last president. Kennedy was the last president, in my view, who you could say was president. So I think that's very significant. He tried to be president. You can maybe make some arguments for others. Maybe Nixon was turned around at some point and wanted to do X, Y, or Z, and they got rid of him. I have my own theories about that. But, really, I think the country and the world fell into the hands of, however you want to describe this kind of, Kabbalistic elite control, this interconnecting, these interlocking sets of power centers that, I think are basically global now. I think we've achieved the apotheosis of kind of state corporate technocratic globalization. I think, things like COVID showed that. So, here we are, and it's important to, as we say in our tagline, to see where you are, you have to look where you've been. And it's as complex as the world was in Kennedy's time, it's so much more cluttered now. You can really see the forces that were involved much more clearly looking back. And as I would argue, and we argue in the film, borrowing from the great Vince Salandria, what happened to these four men is a false mystery. And I can talk more about that later if you like.
Yeah, I'd love to hear about that. And I'd love for you to build upon that here in just a bit. But it kind of makes me think, as we talk about that, about how, people stand up, in my opinion, I call this the big machine, right? And what I mean by the big machine is, people speculate it could be the CIA, the military industrial complex, what have you, the powers that be. But the fact that the president of the United States would be able to stand on his own too and try to fight that force, right? It was evident in obviously the Bay of Pigs in Cuba. He tried. I mean, he wanted to stop Vietnam, and like Libby just mentioned, I mean, like there probably would have not been a Vietnam, and those are my words. But I just think about the impact that he had lived, we would have had a different outcome of things. But so, in your opinion, with Kennedy himself, do you think that was probably one of the main reasons why he was assassinated, was because he had stood up to the big machine, in my words?
Well, I mean, he went after everybody. So yes, the big machine. He went after banking. He went after big steel. He went after big oil. He went after the silver people. He went after the military-industrial complex and the CIA. So he managed to
And the
find.
mafia.
He managed to basically, you know, irk the major sectors of power in this country.
And let's not forget uh, a particular individual who, we have been, for years, we were loath to focus on. But I was once asked after we first screened an early version of the film, why assassinate him? Why not just rig the election and get rid of him? What was the kind of overriding force? And people have, various theories now, but I think that the most impressive theory is that the representative, the tried and true representative of all the forces that Libby just mentioned, the intelligence community, the mafia, big oil, and a number of other, military contractors, is a guy named Lyndon Johnson. And Lyndon Johnson was, about to be, on the very day. I mean, stop me if you know this story, but testifying in Congress that day was a guy called Frank Reynolds. Do you know that story? And Frank Reynolds was talking about bribes that he was compelled to pay to Johnson in order to get his business, get a contract from the government, and things that he learned from Bobby Baker, who was Johnson's right hand man, including payoffs for favorable treatment for General Dynamics, a Texas based company, to get the new THX fighter contract, or TFX fighter contract, the F 111, which was going to go to Boeing, but went to General Dynamics. And because of Johnson's intervention and the bribe that he was paid to do that. So, I mean, Johnson had a long list of skeletons in his closet, which we know that Bobby Kennedy and others were investigating. And in fact, an issue of Life magazine was about to come out that would have brought a lot of these nefarious activities to light. The scandals were breaking, both the Billy Solesti scandal that had to do with agricultural payouts and the Bobby Baker scandal were breaking. And so Johnson faced, and not just Johnson, because I think what people get bogged down in when they don't want to think about this as what they think of as a palace coup, they rightly want to see that there were bigger powers involved. But the proximate cause, we feel, that led to Kennedy's death at that moment was that Johnson was about to go down. He was not only about to be taken off the ticket, which Kennedy's secretary, Evelyn Lincoln, as Robert Caro has just confirmed, believed, and Evelyn Lincoln believes that Johnson was directly responsible for Kennedy's death, along with everyone he represents. But he not only would have been kind of off the ticket and out of politics and lose his dream of being president of the United States, but he might have been in jail for a number of the things that he was involved with. So there was, like, when you think about the fact that on that day there was that hearing that was leading directly to Johnson, and then as soon as the news came about Kennedy's death, and it reached that witness, Frank Reynolds, he basically threw up his hands and said, well, that's it. It's one thing to go after a vice president, but it's too late. He's president now. So that is, I think, a stunning and overlooked by one part of the research community. For whatever reason, they don't bring Johnson into focus. I don't think there's any reason not to bring him into focus as part of the whole constellation of actors. Obviously, Johnson could not have done this on his own, nor probably even, quote, masterminded it, though I have a feeling he helped manage things. And I don't think it's an accident that it happened in Texas. By the way, I'm wearing my Grassy Knoll t-shirt in honor of your show. So they it's not an accident, but of course, it would have required the complicity of the top levels of the military brass, the top levels of the FBI, the top levels of the CIA. the top sectors in every area of the establishment you can name. So Johnson couldn't have just said, "I'm going to do it, boys." He probably said, "Hey guys, your boy here, he's pissed you off. He's now going after me. If you want some of the things that you want, like the continuation of the oil depletion allowance, or you want, the continuation of Cold War tensions, you want to go into Vietnam in a big way. Well, your boy here is about to get, axed. So we got to do something right now." So I have a feeling that he kind of, like, his situation was a driver for the timing of the assassination. That's my feeling after now. I've been looking at this case for decades, but 9 years of intensive study, that's where we've arrived. There is no distinction between these parties. They're all part of the same group or cabal, but Johnson's predicament is the proximate.
Yeah, and I could see that, and I mean, I could see that 100%. I always look at it like from the angle of it's not just one person; it's a collective, like you just mentioned. It had to have been a collective. I mean, how are you going to internally murder a president of the United States who is the most popular president probably since Roosevelt, or even arguably since Lincoln, right? So, I mean, on U.S. soil during a sunny day in November. It's too obvious. I mean, I started the show off talking about how I thought that it was some sort of like symbolic method to it. I didn't specifically say that, but I kind of alluded to it. But the fact that he was actually murdered so publicly and so open, I feel like it had to have sent a message to the world, like, okay, well, if you really don't abide by what we're really trying to accomplish, this will happen to you. And the reason why I say this is I look at the Lumumba, assassination. I look at the Diem brothers and many of other unfortunate situations that happened prior to that. It falls along, Jefferson Morley always talks about the fact patterns. And that's one thing that I can agree with Jefferson Morley about. These patterns that happened, I mean, I believe that Kennedy was actually one of these patterns. And unfortunately, you guys know a little bit more about this, about the other three, but I would argue that unfortunately the other three fell into those fact patterns as well.
Well, certainly, because they were going to pick up where Kennedy left off. And everybody had, if you wanted to stifle what Kennedy was working on, the others had to go as well. And I mean, Martin Luther King J. Edgar Hoover, I think it's J. Edgar Hoover who always talked about the rise of the Black Messiah. And what King was doing at the end of his life, he was no longer just a civil rights leader. He was bringing poor blacks and poor whites together for the March on Washington, and they were going to sit in until they got certain things, and that always terrifies.
Let's not call it the March on Washington. It was the Poor People's Campaign. Yeah. And the occupation of DC until Congress would do something about poverty, right? And he'd also
become more than just a civil rights leader. He was fighting for the rights of everybody. And there's nothing that terrifies the powers that be more than when disparate groups are brought together. So poor whites and poor blacks joining together in the common struggle, that could not happen.
And of course, he was pointing out the connection to the Vietnam War and how the Great Society was dying on the battlefields of Vietnam, as I'm paraphrasing him. So in order, you have Malcolm, who was going to bring charges against the United States in the World Court for human rights abuses against the black population, but he was joining forces with King. He was speaking at places like the Oxford Union, where he brilliantly debated concepts like whether the use of any means necessary is something required when you're dealing with a criminal state. But he and King were starting to meet and come around, and Malcolm's economic and anti-war analysis was probably a little further along than King's, and so they
come out against the war earlier than everybody.
He was talking about praise the Lord and pass the ammunition, and pointing out the criminality of the Vietnam War. So Malcolm was, and he had the ear of all of these. He was about to go speak to a number of these non-aligned nations. There was something called the Bandung Conference, and he was becoming an international and beloved figure. And he could have, in a Cold War context, brought major embarrassment to the United States, and so he had to go. So that was arranged, with various groups, including the NYPD, the FBI, and various other sectors of, some other members of the Black civil rights community, and they got rid of him. And then King, as Libby says, he was organizing poor people of all colors to occupy Washington at a time when the troops were not present. They were in Vietnam, and they worried that that could become a real insurrection, not something like, we're used to now, but I mean, an actual insurrection with hundreds of thousands of people on the Washington Mall not leaving until Congress did something about poverty. And then he's speaking out in his beautiful speech Beyond Vietnam at the Riverside Church on April 4th, 1967. He, once again condemns the criminality of that war and analyzes it beautifully. And a year to the day later, he's killed, April 4th, 1968, talking about sending messages, right? And then, of course, you've got Bobby, and Bobby is, totally shattered by his brother's death, but he picks himself up, and he, first runs for Senate, and then he reluctantly at first runs for president because, he knows that he doesn't feel that McCarthy is up to it, and he thinks that it's now or never for the country, and so he does, and he's a very changed person from who he started as. He maybe still maintains a certain drive, but or as he used to be called, ruthlessness, but he's more than that. I think he's really. I mean, he's doing things like breaking bread with Cesar Chavez, breaking the fast that the farm workers were doing at the time, and he's reaching out to all sorts of disadvantaged groups, and he is pledging to end the war in Vietnam. And privately, many people believe he was going to investigate his brother's death. So, he would have been a very dangerous person with his sort of prosecutorial know-how. He had investigated the mob, and that was not a trivial thing to investigate the mob. Not only because, as people have pointed out, the Kennedy's father may have had some dealings, with that. It's actually a matter of some dispute. Some of it may be a slander, but the problem is you couldn't really do business in post-prohibition America without the mob. So, if you were in the liquor distribution business or the movie business or any of these businesses, you were going to run into the mafia. And they were shot throughout the corporate world, the police, the courts. So this was actually a horror to Bobby Kennedy, and he really took it seriously. And everyone was actually quite amazed when the number of prosecutions, when he became Attorney General, of mob figures went from a few dozen to many, many hundreds and then thousands. I mean, they really went after the mafia. And so, and when you consider again that all these groups are interlocked, I mean, Douglas Valentine has written a book called The CIA is Organized Crime, and they are themselves a criminal organization, but they have long had ties to the more traditional mafia families. So this is how they operated, and this is simply how business is done, and dirty work gets handled. And so this was a very disquieting bunch of revelations for Bobby Kennedy, and he saw how the world really worked, and he was attempting to do something to change that all throughout his career with his brother, and then afterwards, and really going for that. And he knew, I mean, the incredible bravery of all these guys, right? Because they know that they're marked men, all four of them. There was going to be, they probably understood. They understood, as Bobby said to a friend, there are guns between me and the White House. That they walked into it anyway. So that's why we call it four died trying, right? Because they tried despite that. They went ahead despite that, and I think that's a powerful testament and an example that ought to be followed. I mean, we have to somehow generate this kind of leadership again.
I agree 100%. And I am pleased and honored to be joined by John and Libby from Fort Died Trying. And if you haven't watched the documentary yet, it is available on Amazon Prime. And you can also catch it if you have a YouTube Premium prescription, or I almost said prescription, excuse me, subscription.
Right.
You can check it out there as well.
And also on the Journeyman site, Vimeo, and Google Play.
Google Play. We're on every
we're around.
we're on everything. And I should just add that what's out there is what we call the prologue, which is the series overview for the whole feature film series. There will be many more, as John said earlier, there will be many more films to come out in the series, and this is just the first that introduces everybody to what's to come.
Dynamite so far. I mean, it's just, yeah, you guys are amazing. So I just want to give you guys your flowers on that for sure. But yes, please do take the time to actually, if you guys can out there, check it out. You guys will not be disappointed, and you can follow them on X at Fort Died Trying as well. So it's interesting because you just mentioned about Bobby, and we're going to get into Malcolm and Martin here in just a bit. But what's the big topic in the JFK community, as you both know, is why Bobby was so close to the vest with a lot of the important evidence in the JFK assassination. I have a theory on that. I hope you both would like to hear it. I think he wanted to become president, and I think that he wanted to actually, it's like with any good detective, right? You never show what you have until the case is that you have everything you need in order to prove what was going on. I think Bobby was running his own internal investigation between 63 and 68 when he died. Did he have enough time to do it? I mean, I'm sure he had some time to do it, but those were some vital years, in my opinion. And I'd love to hear your guys' takes on this. But I know he countered with Garrison. I know that he countered with other people, but I think there was a reason for that. I think that he, like you brilliantly just mentioned a few minutes ago, he was destroyed by his brother's death. And I think he took it really personal. And I think he was playing it close to the vest. That's just my opinion.
I think if you're in Bobby's position, you have to play it close to the vest. You can't possibly come out with anything that isn't fully backed up, no claims that could be called spurious, and it has to be all totally lined up because he understood the powers that were behind it all. And so if you are going to take them out, you've got to have it all lined up and ready to go, and you've got to be in a position to do so.
Right. You have to have the power of the presidency.
And so he was biding his time.
Yeah, absolutely.
And certainly, look, he had Walter Sheridan working on it. There's some debate as to whether or not Moynihan did a report for him. And so there's a lot of different people who were investigating different sides of all of this. And of course, that afternoon, he called up the CIA and said, "Did you guys do it?"
Yeah. And you're absolutely right. He did, confront, or have Sheridan mess with, Garrison and all that. And all that is unfortunate. But I think that, like there's a famous moment where he's being questioned by some students in California that's often been misinterpreted, where he actually says, he does say he supports the Warren Commission, but that when the time is right, the archives will be released. But it's interpreted a little differently. And people maybe were so shocked, even at the time. We talked to Paul Schrade about this, who was shot along with Bobby. He was Walter Reuther's right hand at the United Auto Workers.
And of course, Reuther was killed.
And Reuther was assassinated. That's another story. But Paul Schrade was with Bobby. He got shot in the head. Interestingly, was invited to Howard Hughes's estate to recuperate. They all were, which is really weird and he mentions that to us in our interview. I didn't know enough at the time to dig further into that, but that's really strange. But Schrade, when he heard Bobby say what he heard at the time on the radio, probably misheard him and thought, oh gosh, he's really just pissed off his enemies, because he said it seemed maybe that he said like, I'm going to reopen the Warren Commission, because in their kind of very nervous minds, it's like this verboten topic, it got changed into that. But what Bobby was really doing was very carefully saying that he believed the Warren Commission, right? He wanted to, smooth the waters and make it seem like he was on board with the official story. Because, if he started making waves about that, they would either try to discredit or kill him immediately. I mean, probably it'd be more in the line of self-discrediting at that time, right? I mean, so anyway, it's a very sticky wicket, I think the British would say. That's a tough one.
Yeah, I mean,
Very tough.
that's just it's amazing, and I look at it like how I talked about Robert Oswald to people. Robert Oswald, he gets a bad rap, right? Rightfully so, right? And you'd be like, why are you comparing these two? And I have an explanation for that. The Robert Oswald, Lee Harvey Oswald's brother. So why I'm making a quick comparison about that is because Robert's story was specifically that he looked into his brother's eyes. I mean, he said everything that you could possibly say wrong about it was a betrayal aspect. Basically, he threw his brother totally under the bus. I believe that he had a family to protect. Right. I believe that if in my opinion, I believe that he had to say this stuff in order to possibly benefit financially out of it. That's a possibility, right? And then obviously like protect his family, because if he came, like you guys talked about RFK, if he would have came out publicly and would have been like, nope, it was conspiracy, people would have, I mean, not only would he probably not have won the presidency in 68, they would have looked at him and they would have looked at him a little bit side-eyed at that. I mean, I think the public would have, because they were just sold a bill of goods about a quote-unquote communist who was a glory-filled man who wanted to kill the president.
Well, we have a good case study to your point, because of course Marguerite Oswald, right? Oswald's mother does come out and does say that her son worked for the U.S. government. And of course, when people hear that now, I mean, you see, like there she is on the news saying it, and people forget that because it wasn't harped on, and of course, she was made to look loony. She could be marginalized because she was a little old lady, even though she was only in her 50s. But so to your point, Robert may have looked around and seen what happened to his mom, and or maybe were they half brothers? I mean, I don't know.
I can't remember.
But maybe I mean, actually, I have not looked into Robert Oswald, so you're informing me of something that we should look into. But
Robert was his older half brother. But yeah, so actually, excuse me, he was his real brother. Because the Oswald died, and he had Lee when Lee was born. He was just an infant, so Robert was the older brother. But there was another brother that was a half brother that Marguerite had prior. So, but anyways, I'm sorry to interrupt you guys. I apologize.
No,
that's fine.
No, I was just we were just agreeing, and that it is amazing to see, So, and then Marina is another one to your point. Obviously, they got to her and said, "Look, if you want to keep your kids, stay in the country, not have something bad happen, you're going to say this." And of course, as the years went on, she renounced her first position, and poor Marina, caught in that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, who knows how all that happened? I mean, the niece of a KGB colonel, and I mean, the whole way Oswald gets here, and she comes too, and it's so hard to get.
I mean, GIs, American GIs at the end of World War II who married Russian women could not get them into this country after World War II. Lee Harvey Oswald goes, and then he comes back with the bride.
Yeah, no.
Especially during the Cold War era. I mean, like right in the thickening of that, right in the prime of it. I mean, are you serious? I mean, Libby, you nailed that. I don't even know. And the fact that, to me, that kind of like resonates like with the movie theater thing, and we could talk about that here in a minute, but like how ridiculous that all sounds. Like, I always talk about the aftermath of the assassination, one of the most ridiculous things I've ever heard in my life. Like, he quote unquote offers a cab to a lady, But then, you know, he gets in the cab, goes, grabs his gun, which he should have had the gun in the first place. Then he like randomly goes, kills JD Tippett. Then goes to the theater, buys popcorn, and then like tries to find somebody. Yeah, 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 yeah. It's just, I mean, like stuff like that, like Libby just mentioned. How in the world would this couple be able to go in 1963 or 62? The United States. I mean, you can't make that up, and so there's something there that's crazy, and so, but my I guess my point is that there's so many obvious instances like this that you get to hear, and you're just like, what? I mean, and it's really sad because there are people, important witnesses like Joel Wesley Frazier, right? He comes out like, you know, 40 or 50 years later. Oh, this is what really happened. Okay. And then you get Marina who completely barked back at Tom Brokaw saying, I didn't take the backyard picture. I didn't do this. I didn't do that. And it kind of makes you wonder, like you mentioned perfectly just a minute ago, John, is that, she probably was like coaxed in by this interpreter and whoever else she had to, all this information just to keep her kids and stay in the United States.
And let's not forget dear old Ruth Payne.
Yes.
I mean, there's
Yes.
that whole very strange relationship between them, and is Ruth managing her? And
She did die, right?
Yes, she did.
Okay, because I'm scared of Ruth. We interviewed Ruth, but I'm oh yeah, we interviewed Ruth. We've got.
Twice?
I mean, we interviewed her twice, and we worked with our friend Max Good, who's done a very excellent film, which I'm sure you've seen, called "The Assassination and Mrs. Payne," which everyone should see. And Max helped us as we interviewed her. Max actually felt like we got her, so you'll have to wait and see, because I confront her with a letter. In fact, I just found the letter. I was like in the bathroom right before the interview, and I find this letter that she wrote to Jim Garrison, which is so schmarmy and weird, where she's offering her services to him, and knowing what he's all about. And it's such a creepy insinuation, but she comes up with this explanation for it. Like, and and funny thing is, I had just seen one of their official kind of water carriers provide this explanation, which is, oh, she was afraid if she wanted to placate him before he came after her. It's like a whole convoluted story. She was like trying to infiltrate his whole case. Anyway, she's a wonder, but there was somebody else I was going to mention. There's Priscilla McMillan, who Max Good got a great interview with. I mean, talk about weird, right? I mean, so she's there to interview Lee Harvey Oswald, like right as he defects, right? And then, there she is with Marina, ready to write the book, me and Lee, and then Dick Cavett, as Max brilliantly shows, just busts her on TV. Like, sounds like you're CIA. It's like, because it's like she says, "Oh, I applied," and Dick Cavett is amazing. He just says that. She's like, "Well, I mean, I applied, but I was rejected." It's like, oh, no, she's agency all the way. And then, of course, my favorite character, who we plan on doing a lot with, is Carrie Thornley, who, of course, was Oswald's friend in the Marines, and who had another one of these guys who had written a book about Lee Harvey Oswald before the assassination, and who is grossly misrepresented in a film by a British guy called I Can't Get You Out of My Head? Is that the one that has the whole Carrie Thornley story? Which, this guy, whose name is Adam Curtis, makes these kind of very heady, monologue-y, very beautifully cut, but filled with BBC archival footage, gorgeous footage. But he just sort of pontificates, and he basically comes up with this kind of cockamamie thesis with about coincidence theory or something. And meanwhile, Kerry Thornley himself, in the introduction to his own book, said, "I think I may have been MK Ultra'd because I was at Atsugi. I knew Howard Hunt. I met all these other people. I knew George de Mohrenschildt, all these assassination figures. Like, I have a feeling that I was kind of like altered. Maybe I was a second Oswald. I might have been a backup guy, but so he's like, there are whole sections of his life missing. And then oddly, he starts a whole movement called Discordianism and the Church of the Subgenius, which is all about how everything's random. In other words, there's nothing planned. Like he's part of like a kind of a deep 60s counterculture infiltration regime, like it, I mean, which became very hip and popular in the East Village in New York where I live, so I mean this, but unlike, uncovered by Adam Curtis in his popular film, uh, was the fact that Thornley himself believed that the assassination was, there was much more to it and that he was probably involved in a way that he can't really quite identify. So that we want to correct the record on that with a particular interview. But anyway, there's all those stories. But as I say, I mean, at some point we should talk about the concept of false mystery. 'Cause, all these stories are great; they're juicy, and the forensics and the files and all that. But a guy named Vince. I mean, do you mind if I should I talk about it now, or do you want to? I mean, a guy named Vince Salandria, for your viewers who don't know, was basically really the godfather of all Kennedy assassination researchers, right? Jim Douglas dedicates his book to him, his great book that everyone should read called JFK and the Unspeakable, Why He Died and Why It Matters. And of course, he's got a new book out now called Martyrs to the Unspeakable, which is about all four of these guys that we're talking about. But in any case, to make a long story short, Vince Salandria, first of all, in eighth grade, was able to identify that Pearl Harbor was not a surprise attack, but a contrived, provoked event to get a recalcitrant U.S. population into the war. In eighth grade, he stood in front of his math class to say, I mean, this guy was sharp, okay? And then fast forward a number of years to 1963, and he's sitting there with his brother-in-law, and they are watching the assassination, and they see, or they were watching over that weekend, and they see Oswald say, "I'm just a patsy," and they say, "Okay, let's give the establishment through the weekend. If he survives the weekend, then Anglo-Saxon concepts of jurisprudence are still intact. If he's killed, then it's a national security state, active state, at the highest levels. And there's even this other component to it, which is more complex about the left at that time, which was, filled with many intellectual Jews. So one of the guys says, and if a Jew, his Jewish brother-in-law says, and if a Jewish guy kills him, then we'll know it's a WASP conspiracy. And what he meant by that was it would scare the left in general, because to have somebody associated like that with, a group that was typically, critical and questioning, would shut down their critical and questioning, to a large extent, which it did. And so, lo and behold, out comes Jack Ruby, who was part of the mafia in general, was a Jewish guy, but was deeply connected, most importantly, to Lyndon Johnson. And in fact, Richard Nixon told his aide at the time, "That's Lyndon Johnson's guy." So Vince Salandri was able to predict that happening, and along with his brother-in-law, and then he very quickly dismantled the Arlen Specter's magic bullet theory, and and confronted Specter. And so once you have that one, and what Vince would say in terms of this is that it's a false mystery, because as soon as you dry clean Governor Connolly's clothes, right? You um, you take the car that Kennedy was traveling in, and you send it back to Ford and have all of the markings and the windshield. There's no forensic analysis. It's just okay. And then the prime suspect, the alleged prime suspect, is killed in police custody. These
On TV.
on television. These, which, as to your point, help send a message as well. Uh, these things are just basically screaming that the state is involved. And then he found other instances. For instance, the message that was broadcast to both Air Force One as it was leaving Dallas, and the cabinet plane as it was with all these cabinet officers in it that was returning from Hawaii was we within an hour of Oswald's arrest, it was we got the guy, there is no conspiracy, case closed. And so when you do that to sophisticated people an hour after you've arrested one guy, you're basically saying, we did it, and we're going to tell you what to say, and you're going to just take it. Because obviously there's no rational universe in where you have solved the crime of the president within an hour because you picked up one guy. And every sophisticated person in that on that cabinet plane and on Air Force One knew that what they were seeing was a fait accompli. They were given, they were given official reality, and they were being asked to swallow it or else. And so, just by the actions of the state and their unwillingness to examine the crime, they were not interested in actually interviewing many witnesses, putting together the pieces, figuring it really out. No, they were interested in just stopping it. And you can see by the state's actions that that's what they were doing. And it's not because they were hiding Cuban involvement or Soviet involvement or anything like that. It was so clearly their own hands that they were, hiding in their own hand in this, that they were hiding. And that's just evident everywhere you look from, there's so much evidence, it's beyond belief. So what we're looking at here is a false mystery. And the real mystery is not who did it. We know the state did it. The real mystery is who are we and what do we do? Like, what are we, what's wrong with us that we allow this to happen, and we remain kind of demoralized and stupefied and, unable to act. Now, I mean, as difficult as it is, but we don't do anything about it. And this happens again and again and again. And a tiny minority that will say something, and those people are dismissed as kooks, and off we go. I mean, and we know a lot of the reasons why some of that happens, but it's just, it's this enigma of human nature that it happens in the way it does so often. And this is how the powerful, a tiny minority, sit on top of everybody else.
Well, and this is why I think your project is so important, because it actually keeps the topic trending with all four men, especially. But, through the years, it seems like as time goes on, this thing keeps getting swept under the rug as time goes on with the four murders. And it's really sad, because I saw Ben Shapiro come out in an interview a couple of months ago, and he said basically it's no different than the McKinley murder, right? And I'm not trying to diminish the McKinley murder. What I'm saying is that literally that day changed the history as we know it. And
I'm sorry, may I say something? The McKinley
please do.
The McKinley murder is actually much more significant than people realize. So he's totally wrong to say that, because
Right.
the McKinley murder leads to Teddy Roosevelt. And well, first it leads, I'm trying to get my timeline straight, but it's remember the Maine to hell with Spain. So that's happened already. That's a false flag operation that wherein the U.S. becomes an imperial nation for real, like beyond its territorial sea. I mean, we take Cuba, and then we take the Philippines, right? And the guy who kind of helped really push that and organize that was Teddy Roosevelt. And he wanted to, he thought that, in fact, he once said to a friend, because the frontier was over. So he was like, you know what? We're losing the martial spirit in this country. We need war. He's like, I would like nothing more better, he said, than to see New York City burn, so that we would be revived and somehow come out. So the whole remember the Maine to hell with Spain, it was that era's 9/11. And they got everyone going. And then Teddy Roosevelt, became president soon thereafter by a lucky stroke of a lone nut assassin, and he gets to then continue the American imperial policy. We can say there's certain good things about Teddy Roosevelt. He was a trust buster against the monopolies and all this, but he really felt that the manly virtues were going to be left behind because we'd become too fat and comfortable in America in 1898.
Let J.P. Morgan, though, take over the economy. So,
Yeah.
it's
Wow, this is blowing my mind. I had no idea about the McKinley transition to Roosevelt and that angle. That is incredible. Thank you.
It needs to
Wow.
be explored more. We've only scratched. I mean, I need to learn more about it. But yeah, the Maine was a major turning point, and Teddy Roosevelt taking power. Anyway, yeah. So Shapiro is trying to dismiss. You're saying, Kennedy?
Yeah, he's trying to undermine the significance of the murder of John F. Kennedy and like how it relates today. He essentially just said that, it's not really important. And what that does to younger people that are out there, right? It makes them believe that. And I think that's the problem. As time goes on, if they feel like it's not relevant to their lives, which I still believe it is way relevant to their lives, because again, a elected U.S. president who wanted to change, like you both so beautifully cover in your documentary. This guy was rubbed out by his own government, and people have to see this, and that's my point about our community. The JFK community sits here, and they're like in different camps, right? We got the LBJ people, we got the CIA people, we've got the Mossad people. We need to, pardon my language, put that bullshit aside. We need to literally focus on like the importance of that murder, not make it about us, make it specifically about his death and how it relates to us today. I know I'm passionate about that, but it. Go ahead, Libby. Go ahead.
I was trying to do that. I was the co-chair of something called the Truth and Reconciliation Committee that was formed in 2019 and was the brainchild of David Talbot. And I really wanted to make it a big tent with all the various researchers and all the various theories there, and let everybody fight it out. Now, to some degree, John Simkin does that with his big, I don't know if you've seen the big JFK researcher list. There's about 118 people on it, and it runs the gamut from Max Holland to, Jefferson Morley and everybody else in between. And from time to time, the debates can get going there. But too often, everybody's very territorial, and they'll say, oh, if you're going to tell the Johnson story, well, then it's going to discredit all the other work you're doing on all these good fronts about the fact that, one of the reasons they wanted to get JFK was because he was trying to make peace with the Soviets, and that gets in the way of the military industrial complex and all these different things. And so people get very territorial, and there are sacred cows, and it's just very difficult, and it should be everybody puts their ideas on the table, because you know what, it isn't just to pull this off, as we said earlier, it's not just one entity. Everybody has a piece of it, and that's why they get everybody chasing their tail.
Absolutely. It muddies the waters. It really does. All that stuff. It's almost as if they want, the people that believe in these different angles, right? I heard one the other day. I don't know if you guys heard this one. People claim that Abraham Zapruder was a gunman. I'm like, okay.
There's also people who say the whole Zapruder film is a fake. It was,
or that parts of it were faked, or and we've had a lot of talk. We've interviewed Robert Groden a lot, and of course, he is the preeminent expert on all that. And I tend to trust Robert, and he feels that he can see where the damage or et cetera was done. I mean, I'm willing to listen though to the people who feel like there were frames taken away or frames added. I'm willing to listen to people who think that it's possible Zapruder was put there to film it. I mean, we're not going to discount that completely. I mean, everybody else's film was taken and his wasn't. I mean, of course his was taken by Life magazine, that was brokered, but they and he got whatever deal he got. But so I mean, I think anything's possible. That building he comes out of, right?
Permadex building.
Was it Daltex?
Yeah.
But anyway, that building that his offices were in, was he OSS? I mean, I don't know.
What's with the guy who lived forever? The old guy I used to see at the Carlisle.
Oh, yeah. He was the best. He used to date, what was it, Jackie's secretary?
Press secretary, yeah.
And we would hang out with him, and he would yell at the staff. He was really mean to the waiters. What was his name?
I can't think of his name.
He was Ruth Gordon's son.
He was the illegitimate son of Ruth Gordon and
a big Hollywood or a big Broadway producer.
Yes.
But but anyway, he used to
Jones Harris.
Jones Harris.
Harris. He really had it out for Abraham Zapruder.
Yeah. Well, anyway, there's all kinds of weird politics around that. But yes, people should bury the hatchet and recognize the importance. I mean, that's the thing, though. So much of this is about, it's like between the Ben Shapiro, it means nothing, to the Jim Douglas, it means everything, right? It means so much. And, that's really, I mean, we take our cue from Jim in that we are trying to emphasize. And I think we did it in a way. My dad was in the Kennedy administration. He was a young intern in the Bobby Kennedy Justice Department in the Civil Rights Division, and then he became a young law student, and eventually an attorney in the Civil Rights Division after uh, Kennedy was killed. But he would not give me the time of day on the Kennedy assassination, right? He'd say, "Who killed Kennedy, Dad?" He'd say three words: Lee Harvey Oswald. And so you couldn't get him to move. But something about the film that we did and having all four together made him say, it was like a fact pattern, right? As Jefferson Morley or you would say. And he said, something about the four of them together, they give each other strength. And you suddenly you realize, oh, okay. And it was the focus on what they were doing, right? If you focus on what each of them were doing when they were killed, rather than like who shot from where, what are the trajectories and the forensics, you focus on that and you make a very compelling, I would say, irrefutable case for state involvement in their deaths, orchestration of their deaths, right? And when I say state, I mean that kind of combination of powerful forces that is the government plus corporate and financial areas, and whatever you want to call the much maligned term, the deep state, the permanent government, the shadow government. The people who run, try to run things at least throughout all these administrations, and there you had, in my view, a truly legitimate challenge to that power. And then a few others, and each one, I think you're absolutely right, and I think Bob Dylan got it right. I think his masterpiece of a song, which I'm sure you've listened to many times as I have, is it's all about, they killed him like a human sacrifice. They killed him right there in front of everybody's eyes, so quick by surprise. I mean, it was and he says the age of the Antichrist has just only begun. That's what somebody said to him. And he also says a wise old owl said, it's keep his mouth shut, said a wise old owl. Business is business, and it's murder most foul. But that there's an occultic aspect. There's like a kind of a shock and awe psychological aspect to his murder. I firmly believe that. They were sending a message, just like a mafia hit. Not to say that the mafia hit him, but all by themselves, we know they helped. But that's the purpose of doing a killing like that, is to send a message to anyone who had ears to hear and eyes to see that peace and efforts towards peace and efforts in these directions would not be tolerated. And the last thing I'll say is, Vince Salandria, when he went to Dealey Plaza with another researcher, he was approached by a weird guy. He had no notoriety, and he's approached at Dealey Plaza by a weird guy wearing sandals who says, "Hey, how's Mark Lane?" And so, like, how does he know who I am and that I know Mark Lane, the famous Kennedy researcher? And he goes, "Well, he's good. He's fine, I guess." And he goes, "Next time you write something," now he's speaking to Vince, "why don't you write how a socialist president was killed at the site of a socialist project?" And first of all, Kennedy, which is such a creepy thing to say, right? I mean, have you heard? Okay, and the socialist project, of course, was Dealey Plaza, because it was a WPA Roosevelt era project, a Works Progress Administration project. Now, Kennedy, obviously he believed in a kind of the intervention of the government, but on behalf of the people more than the way it often gets done now on behalf of corporations. So was there a kind of socialistic aspect? I don't know if you could quite say that, but he was definitely certainly opposed to state command and control of the economy. But that's what they did fear about him, right? Because there's that famous line that Jim Douglas found in the it was at Forbes magazine, where they called it the Ides of April, because it was in April that Kennedy faced down the head of U.S. Steel, and they accused Kennedy of exercising what they called jawbone control over the economy. And that's the last thing that these guys wanted. So they certainly considered him a command and control socialist. So yeah, you can't have that. Not when you're. Of course, what he really was he said, look, we've all just agreed to a price to keep inflation down, the unions and the heads of the steel companies. And then the next day, the steel company turns around and says we're not going to do it. And so he got pissed at them, and he wrestled them to a standstill and said, we're not going to give you any more military contracts, right? And they came around, but they hated that, so he just that was probably that, along with getting so many things that he did to piss off those communities, got him killed.
Again, honored to be joined by John and Libby from For Died Trying. It's just amazing. The prologue that they have, it is incredible work. And let's talk a little bit about the documentary itself. I know that on Amazon right now we have the prologue. So where are we at in the process with this right now?
So we have basically shot over 130 interviews. A lot of them are last interviews. We were lucky enough to get people like Mort Saul and Dick Gregory and Linsky before they passed away. And we were in the process of putting these films together. And for reasons that are not that clear to us, we have been stopped from releasing by our principal backer.
Yeah, we're being suppressed by forces unknown, really, and for reasons unknown. It could be complete ignorance of the business or misguided sense of greed and what needs to happen, or it could be something else, and it could be that people are being influenced. I mean, there's a guy who's involved with USAID who hovers around this whole story, and is a kind of a recent first-time filmmaker, but a creepy segment producer working out of Brazil for McNeil Lehrer and USAID, and he somehow has gotten to a principal guy's head, and so we've been forced to sue, and we're very hopeful that will come out in our favor. But in the meantime, this is sort of a dangerous thing because of what is going on. But we're sort of tired of it all, and we just they're burying the truth at a really time when assassination is more than ever in the news. I mean, whatever we think about what happened in the Trump assassination, whatever you think about what happened with I guess Charlie Kirk, and so many things that have been going on, and you want to be able to see something about the history. We've got a whole big feature film which we'll share with you off camera, rough cut. It's called Jack Joins the Revolution, and it's the kind of the beginning of the story, and intercuts. It shows you the world as it was, that we grew up in, the Cold War world, which somebody in our team, the one we're suing, doesn't think is important to talk about. Incredibly fear-driven era that the country lived in. I mean, right now there's kind of an effort to resurrect Joseph McCarthy, as he was right that there were communists in the government. Well, be that as it may, that there may have been sort of Soviet sympathizers and spies in the government, the whole approach that not just Joe McCarthy, but before Joe McCarthy took to the concept of communists in different aspects of industry or the government was so damaging to this country. Okay, so even if their intentions were good, they were genuinely concerned that there was communist infiltration. What they did was so totalitarian in nature. We might as well have been living in the Soviet Union during that period. And you have to understand that if you're going to understand who Kennedy was and what he was up against when he's trying to make peace later with the principal seat of communism. While not himself embracing it at all, he did not like totalitarianism. He did not like Soviet communism, but he saw that in a nuclear age and just for a million reasons, it was better to go about this with judiciousness and grace and with peace in his heart. And but for him to come out of World War II and the Cold War and get to that place is an amazing story. But you need to know what it meant for him to reach out to someone like Khrushchev. And you don't know that, you can't understand that unless you understand the Cold War and what it was like at home and what it was like abroad. And that's what we do in this. And that was something that confused the guy we're working with, who's maybe got some issues. So so that's the story you'll get. That's being suppressed right now. You'll see the kind of the development of Kennedy from who his father was, and the family and the world, going to the war, the incredible experience he has nearly dying, floating around in the Pacific, and then into his early political career, and nobody knows this. I didn't know this until somewhat recently, is that he becomes a huge champion for Africa. He becomes the go-to guy for these. First of all, he's a vocal anti-colonialist, vocal, and this is another crucial thing. It's like, how you want to understand why he gets killed by these groups, you need to know that. It's like he stands up in Congress and makes a speech about the French in Algeria that is unbelievable. It's like you've never heard anything more kind of sane, and yet for its time and even now radical, against the whole concept of neo-imperialism and straight up old-fashioned colonialism. He says, the French have got to get out. People have to be self-determinant, and that's what he believes about all these African nations as well. He's when he makes that speech, he becomes the best friend of all these colonial nations, and he believes it, as maybe because of his Irish heritage, which as he makes in speech after speech. And you know what? I haven't heard these things in other films, and we've got these clips. Okay, we very rarely hear about the Algeria speech, and we sort of voiced it with kind of a actor and a little bit of AI, but we admit to it. And we have all these clips of him saying these incredible things, like, my people lived under subjugation for 700-800 years. I understand this, and I don't like Soviet colonialism in Eastern Europe, and I don't like Western colonialism throughout Africa, Latin America, and Asia. So what are we going to do about it? We that's got to stop. Everyone's got to stop it. And that's how. And he comes back from Vietnam early, and we have these incredible interviews with him on a show. It was called Longines Chronoscope, and he's there. He's just come back from his tour, and he's like, the French have to make a plan to leave Vietnam, and we cannot go in there. We have to help these people transition. And yes, they might even bring in the communists would win right now, but maybe we can help them. If the French make a plan to get out, we could maybe help them to a third way that isn't totalitarian, communist, but is not at the same time French colonial. So that's what he's talking about. And so anyway, this is the story. This is among the stories that are being suppressed right now, very sadly. And we show the concurrent rise of the CIA and what they're doing. So you've got basically two tracks happening. You've got the development of Jack Kennedy, who's saying the U.S. has not, in the post-war world where we're now the strongest country on earth, we cannot back up these colonial regimes. We have to support these independence movements. And then you've got the CIA, who's coming up at the same time saying, we need to support our colonial brethren and help make the transition to a neo-imperial, neo-colonial economic model, and where there are people who are working against our corporate interests, we're going to hold coups and assassinations. And that's what they start doing, as you pointed out, the Congo, and of course Guatemala famously, in Iran, where they're about to install another Shah. I mean, so this is what was going on, and it's these parallel developments that come out of the Cold War and are surrounded by the Cold War, Anyway, and so we give you that before you even get to his presidency, and then you get to the presidency, and we want to tell you, who he's surrounded by and what's going on with that, and then you get fast and furious things like the Bay of Pigs, which leads to the Cuban Missile Crisis, which leads almost in a direct line, as Arthur Schlesinger says in the trailer, to the assassination. So,
And I think
anyway,
if you understand the background where Kennedy comes from and what was happening in the world then, it might make it easier for people today to understand why it's still important.
yeah,
And we're such a young country still. If you think about the fact that when JFK is elected president, we only have been out of World War II for 15 years.
yeah.
I mean, it's nothing.
To your point about young people, Tim, I was going to say that our friend Lewis Lapham, who we made a film with called "The American Ruling Class" for the BBC. It's actually a dramatic documentary musical if you're into music, and it's about to be released again on the Criterion Channel. And uh, Lewis would always say Lewis was a huge believer in history, and he started a history quarterly called Lapham's Quarterly, which people interested in history should read. It covers a theme every 4 times a year. But he was fond of quoting, and I'm going to mess up who originates the quote, but he's got a great quote, which is, he who does not have 3,000 years at his beck and call is living hand to mouth. Or even better, not to know one's history is to forever remain a child. And that's the problem, right? They treat us, the elites treat us like children. They don't want us to know, just like they didn't want Frederick Douglass, the slave, to become literate. They don't want us to have historical literacy. They want, they use that term conspiracy theory to discredit the kind of real politique of the way the world works, and that we're meant to be kept in a state of abject darkness and ignorance and confusion and tribalism, right? We're supposed to be like, okay, it's these guys, it's those guys, it's the Republicans, it's the Demopublicans, and MAGA, and it's the woke, and so everyone's beautifully divided, and they can be easily controlled that way, and they just keep up this kind of dialectical theater, and people like aren't aware of earlier instances of this. I mean, was it Jay Gould who said, "I can hire one half of the working class to kill the other"? I mean, that was another famous quote from that Lewis loved. So this is keeping us in historical ignorance is how they get away with these things time and time again.
Mm. Yeah, and it sounds like to me, because your documentary is so important, that critical thinking is outlawed today with anything. And it's really unfortunate because critical thinking is what we're supposed to do is living in a free country, right? And it is just absolutely, it's crazy because this is so important, especially with these four individuals. I mean, Malcolm, we haven't even talked about Malcolm, how important he was. I mean, I could talk to you guys. I'm serious. 8 hours. I could talk to you guys so long. You guys were, we're within 2 hours. So like we usually do it within 2 hours. What we usually do is we have repeats with our guests and, like Paul Blow and we got Joe, we got Eyes Wide Open coming back, and we got and that's the important thing is that you guys have so much to say, and it is so important for your voice to be heard. And I think the more that we have influencers that are out there that can spread the word of this, the more that we can actually build momentum. Because right now, like you just mentioned, they want us to just sit here. Sorry about that. They want us to just sit here and just kind of like take it and just not really do anything about it. But I think critical thinking is vital. We have to, and our history. We have to address the history. What you guys, and I'm not trying to really kiss up to you, but I really mean this. What you guys have done with the four of these guys is so important with where we are today. And it is just, this is why we're living in like a society where we look at things and we're just like, oh, hey, Charlie Kirk got killed, but we had a bunch of phones and stuff doesn't look right. and they tore down the scene. A day later, they mixed up, they whatever happened, that was fishy. But we're like moving on. Let's go ahead and just move on to something else. Okay. I mean, we can't do that. We have to question what is going on. And so my rant on that is the fact that you guys had to govern upsets me. It just upsets me because this is really important stuff.
That we had a what did you say? That we had a
Governed, like a not when I say govern, please forgive me. When I say like
that we're being suppressed.
Suppressed,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah, right.
Please forgive me.
No, it is very upsetting, and it's beyond.
And it's a lot of history, and it's a lot of it's these interviews with all these people who aren't here anymore to share their stories, and not all of it is going to necessarily be a smoking gun or something like that, but it's a period of time, and it's a very important period of time to understand and to be able to appreciate that certain things that are happening today have their seeds there and even further back, and
which is why you would think we can understand that there is a strong possibility. I mean, funny enough, I've been of the opinion that it's like ignorance, stupidity, and maliciousness on the part of maybe a couple individuals, but others have been saying to us, look, this doesn't make any sense. Just from a marketing standpoint, you should be getting these films out as quickly as possible and putting them out now, because his whole thing, it has to be done all at once. They all have to be done. He didn't understand that we'd switched to a franchise model. And so that is to say, features or whatever size they were going to come out when they were ready, and they could, that we could get them out every few months if they were episodes, and a little bit longer than that if they're going to be features, but you release them when they're done and you keep building. And that's what we had told everybody, and that's what everyone was waiting for.
And we're doing it independently, not selling it to a Netflix or somebody like that, because we want to maintain our editorial independence and not be in a situation where some executive comes along and sticks their heavy boot down in the middle of it all.
Which means if you're not doing it with Netflix, where they put you up on their home screen and say, here it is, you have to build an audience over time. So you have to get those concentric circles pushing outward from each film. Each film brings more people to the next one, et cetera, and it grows over time. And then one day, you've got a bunch of stuff you can binge watch, okay, if you want to do it that way. But let's keep it going, and let's keep the interest up, especially when Bobby Jr. was running for president, becomes part of the administration, when he's in our film, he's a major part of our film, and then of course we've got all these incidents happening that need and all these geopolitical events that need contextualization, and so it's a tragedy on 1,000 levels, whether it's out of ignorance or it's out of some kind of intelligence agency chicanery. I mean, speaking of back to Malcolm. And to relate it to this, I mean, very often the way intelligence services work is that they kind of press on weak links, and they they create doubt, right? They write poison pen letters. I think about them sending the tape of Martin Luther King allegedly having an affair with somebody to Coretta, right? To his wife, to sow unease, distrust, whatever, or threaten him. He'd write him a letter, say, you should just kill yourself now. Or letters that would be anonymously written or missourced from one group within the kind of the Nation of Islam community to another, to sow factionalism within the Nation of Islam and within Malcolm's group that developed later. I mean, and they did this to the Black Power movement for a long time, and no doubt are still doing it, including creating their own kind of astroturf groups. But my point is that this is how it works, right? If you can get to somebody and say, oh, is that how it should be happening? Maybe you've been had, maybe you've been taken, and then the guy's like, oh God, especially if that's what he fears. A particular guy fears the most. He fears being taken, or he fears his wife is having an affair, or he fears that he's not gonna he's gonna be broke or whatever, look like a fool, and you work on that. And that's what psychological warfare is. And when it's directed at an individual, you can make stuff like what's happening to us happen. So it's quite possible that this is kind of like a COINTELPRO, right? A counterintelligence program that's been directed at us because, if I were them, I would direct it at us. I mean, it's not like we're special or anything, except insofar as we maybe have come up with a way of getting even people like my father and other kind of more traditional thinking people to look at these assassinations in a new way by dint of looking at what they were doing. So perhaps that would make us more dangerous. But I mean, the fact is that intelligence services, they have files. We learned in the pages of the New York Times a number of years ago now, they had files on grandmothers who were marching in the Vietnam. One branch of Army intelligence, one branch of one intelligence service of the many intelligence services in this country kept files on individual grandmothers who, they were not making films, they were not going on podcasts or the radio, they were just coming out with their little signs to say, stop the bombing. And they had files. So, and this is the kind of thing, I mean, they love to do. We learned so brilliantly through the FBI break-in in Media, Pennsylvania in 1971. You know that story where the anti-war activists managed to get all the FBI files, just take them all, which is amazing, from this little branch office. And that's probably the one real leak I think we really had, where you could really see the truth of some of what they. And one of those documents was about creating the atmosphere of total surveillance. So even when they're not actually surveilling you, they want the atmosphere of total surveillance, which I think has a lot to do with certain revelations from Snowden and whatever. But the point is that this document said we want these activists to feel like there's an agent behind every mailbox. Okay, so it's like a panopticon effect, right? Because if the whole concept of Jeremy Bentham and the panopticon is you're in a there's a central area with mirrored glass and the prison is all around, and you can't tell when they're looking at you and when they're not, so you just assume that they're always looking at you. And that's what they've done to us with all telling us that these things are basically they're hot bugs, they're hot mics. They just, I mean, look, they did this in Nazi Germany. People would put tea cozies over their phones in the 30s in Germany because everybody knew that the phones could be turned into microphones. But so now with AI, of course, you can go beyond and algorithms and massive supercomputers. You can go beyond a panopticon effect. You can have an actual panopticon where everyone really is being surveilled all the time. So this has a dampening effect. But anyway, I just we are no doubt being messed with. And I think they did it by getting into the head of the guy we were working with, our partner on this. And it's too bad. It's too bad because he wasn't a bad guy, and it's just he's been so like jangled and turned around that it's very disquieting to see. But that's what can happen, and that's what they did. They got people in the movement in Philadelphia, and they got these different black nationalist groups to start shooting each other through disinformation, COINTELPRO campaigns, to start killing each other. And that eventually becomes the Bloods and the Crips, by the way. That they're, if you ever see a film called Bastards at the Party, it's about the Black Panther Party, morphing into that.
Well, that's the reason why, King is bringing people together, Malcolm is bringing people together, and they love their name of their game is division.
That's right. And Fred Hampton, the brilliant young Fred Hampton, I mean, he's going to the white the Appalachians around Illinois, the Puerto Ricans, he's, the Hispanics, he's getting everyone together in meetings and saying, we're all in this together. Let's do it, man. And he was a uniter. And so they just ordered a hit. I mean, that's one, it's funny, the left, who should have been on top of this, back in the day. They were my people. Okay, at one point, they refused to, except for Fred Hampton. Like I've had email debates with Noam Chomsky about various issues, the JFK assassination being one, and world 9/11 being another. And he will cop to, oh, maybe the feds did King and Fred Hampton. Good for him, because that one's Fred Hampton's pretty obvious. It's literally a bunch of cops coming in and just shooting the hell out of his bed. But they refuse to see, like Ben Shapiro, they refuse to see the significance. For Chomsky, he wants the Kennedy assassination to be just a random act, or maybe at most a palace coup, because he wants there to be a kind of a structural continuity to the policy. He refuses to see how Kennedy was making real measures to withdraw from Vietnam, that he did have an anti-colonial stance, that he was definitely not going to commit hundreds of thousands and millions of ground troops to Vietnam. That was just never going to happen. That's just not him. As soon as you see the film, as soon as you do the research that I know you've done and that we've done, and you look at these films and the stuff we're putting together, there's just not a chance that was going to happen. And so, was he willing to, up to a point? I mean, he regrets actually his involvement in the Diem coup. He did not want it to go to a killing, but he, feels, and we have a recording of him saying, I could have done more to stop what happened. He feels bad about it. But, was he interested at first in the CIA as a way of kind of, inserting, doing things that, in the world that wouldn't, lead to the great losses of life that war does? Yes, he was interested, but he hated war from his experience in World War II. And he was even more terrified, as everyone who's read James Douglas and Talbot knows, he was even more terrified about war after events like the Cuban Missile Crisis. And he knew that we came very close. If Johnson had been president, or Nixon, I would argue, or if people like
Nixon was a
Curtis
Quaker.
LeMay. All right, well, we can debate these things. It's okay. It's an open tent. If Curtis LeMay had been listened to, these people who were sitting around that room during those 13 days, I mean, we would have been, the whole world would have been vaporized. If he hadn't been president in that moment with his brother, and actually McNamara plays a good role in this. Maybe later he's not so good, but he helps. If they hadn't been there doing their thing and taking wise, judicious advice and sifting it all out and posing questions to the generals, okay, so then what happens? After we do that, what do they do? Oh, so I mean, you don't think they would invade Berlin at that moment? And then what would we do? And then what would happen? And it's like these guys, it's like you realize that some of them, can you scooch just a hair? You realize that some of them, here, scooch this way, okay. That you realize that some of them, don't even think it through. They just want to have a war. They've been trained to have a war. They want to have a goddamn war. And so Kennedy, amazingly, I mean, the guy was, quite brilliant. And whatever his personal failings and his womanizing and all that, he loved his kids, and he didn't want the world incinerated. He wasn't a sociopath, and he wasn't and he wasn't such a fervent ideologue that it's like, I hate those people, we gotta kill them. It's like, no. Maybe we can convince them. Maybe we can beat them in a competition, a friendly competition. But look, there's a reason why Khrushchev wept when he died, and Khrushchev then was himself dethroned. There's a reason why the people around the world knew that a great tragedy had taken place when he was killed, and that it marked a major turning point in world affairs. They understood that, and the groups that he created, USAID, the Alliance for Progress, the Peace Corps, these groups got corrupted into, USAID just became a straight up CIA front. Just straight up, everyone knows, USAID, CIA. The Alliance for Progress, which was going to elevate, imagine, we have this immigration problem. You're talking about current problems, that the Alliance for Progress was designed to help elevate Latin America into a middle class group of countries that could reap the benefits of their own natural resources and labor. And that was the point of it. And then as soon as he's dead, it's just a way of funneling money to, what they call the comprador class, the local oligarchs, right? And keeping an oppressive boot on Latin America. Who would want to leave their home country if there were good jobs? That those the kind of infrastructure that might have been created if the Alliance for Progress had been allowed to go on, and then they could have taken it from there, right? Might have just taken a little bit of a jump start from this whole colonial heritage to get Latin America on its feet a lot sooner, and independent, because they would have had to heel the Yankee boot lifted off of their neck. Instead, the Yankee boot stays on their neck, and now we have and these Nike and Adidas are made in the same maquiladora in a tin shack in the sun, and people are paid shit, and then they want a better life, and then of course sometimes they turn the spigot on and say, oh, come, because they want to depress wages and create instability, and then they say something, no, stop, and then they create this kind of dialectical theater of pain and suffering, that just a back and forth where they're controlling both sides. And so don't get me started on what's happening now, but the point is that these things would not have been a problem if that line of policy had been allowed to develop. And instead, they turned it into money laundering schemes for their friends in the hierarchy in those countries. So anyway, and USAID, I mean, I'm glad it's gone for whatever that's worth. I'm glad that that Trump got rid of that, or whoever is with Trump got rid of that. But because it become a laugh, it become a sick parody of what it was supposed to be. This wasn't developing the Agency for International Development. What did they develop? They kept the world in a state of immiseration, along with their corporate and military and intelligence partners. That was the job. And we create this incredible amount of, we have incredible productivity and create an incredible amount of waste, and manage to keep, 80% of the world in a state of poverty. And that's what Kennedy was like, you know what? I mean, I'll never forget. I guess it was Bobby who had the line. They went down to some mine in India or maybe in South Africa. And he goes, you know what? I'd become a communist too if I had to work in this mine. And so it's like, that's what they were addressing. They were like, guys, you're going, what is the saying? Those who don't allow peaceful revolution anywhere are going to have violent revolution everywhere. I think there was a line like that. Anyway, that's what happens, And so anyway, we had a great guy, and that's the problem, is that you get a guy like King or a guy like Jack Kennedy or any of those guys, very rarely. We got four kind of packed together, and there were others around them like Fred Hampton.
I think it's the post-war era. Coming out of World War II, there is a lot of, for better for worse, a lot of American optimism and a lot of thought about the fact that we can do better and there are things we can do. And the GI Bill of Rights, which sends so many people to college for the first time. And
Yeah.
and also you can argue that there's a lot of problems in the country in the 50s, a lot having to do with racism, but it's also a period of time where the economic gap between the rich and the poor is not as big as it will start to become later and later over time. And the CEO of the corporation took the same train to work every day as the secretary did. He did not get into a limousine and get driven and dropped off and take a special elevator up to his office. He got on the train, he got on the subway, and if the train wasn't working very well and he missed his meeting, he called his friend and he said, "Hey, Ted, what's going on with the LIRR
Yeah.
today? I was 2 hours late for my meeting. That can't happen."
Right, his friend in city government or whatever.
Or the guy who ran the LIRR, whatever it was. I mean,
Right.
there was a lot more. We were much more
In the
all
same boat.
together in
We
the
were
same boat.
Yeah. We were in the same boat.
No private planes, not a fleets of private cars. I mean, it's just ridiculous.
Yeah.
that dynamic there, like you mentioned the 50s, about like there was not such a gap. And that what's so interesting about that too. I had a rapid fire question for both of you. Dan, you guys know who Daniel Sheehan is, right? Okay. Yeah. So Daniel Sheehan, his classes are incredible. I just love to sit here and just soak in what he has to say, like both of you. I mean, I'm just sitting here listening to both of you, and I'm like, this is awesome. But no, I don't. No, I don't. And to hear just, it's great. But my point with Sheehan is Sheehan likes to talk about how Vietnam War opened up a door for opiate distribution for the United States, right? Through coffins and what have you. I wanted to get your take on that, because origins of that. What a crazy thing to put in our ghettos, and our not they weren't even ghettos, neighborhoods, right? I mean, this is just insane. Like,
Twofer.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
It's a twofer. It funds the CIA's black budgets, so they don't have to go to Congress to get money to do whatever the hell they want to do. They're making it with the drugs, and it stops the growth of the population, the intellectual growth and the economic growth of a whole segment of the population right then and there, by getting them addicted to things, and it builds crime, and it does everything else. And so where you have that moment in time, as I mentioned, the GI Bill of Rights, with more people going to college and doors opening, they don't want the doors opening, they want the doors closing.
That's right. Now that was the problem, is that those Vietnam era kids suddenly were resisting, and they realized they had to do a number of things to stop that, including creating economic conscription, dumbing the society down, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But to the point about drugs, obviously there's the Vietnam era where they're bringing in all the heroin, which is destroying, the black community in particular, but will then spread into many areas. But before that, of course, there's a little thing called Operation Gladio, right? And Gladio, I discovered, sad to my great chagrin, that my dad, after becoming totally disillusioned after the assassinations and the Chicago police riot in '68 at the Chicago Democratic Convention, he leaves government and he ends up actually at Nixon's law firm, because he knows Nixon's going to become president and he wants to be partner quickly. And anyway, he's a Rhodes Scholar, and that's what he does. Here's the thing. Unfortunately for him, while he was part of that, he ended up having to represent a guy named Mikhail Sindona. And Sindona was part of the whole Vatican banking scheme. And it turns out that a little thing called Operation Gladio and the Vatican were like this, right? So Operation Gladio was designed as a stay-behind network for, in case of Soviet invasion of Western Europe, they were going to train a bunch of people and leave a bunch of weapons around for them. And of course, who they were training was mostly extreme right figures, former Nazis, Italian fascists, etc. And they did this all throughout Europe. In the end, of course, the Soviets were never going to invade Western Europe for a variety of reasons. But what they did use these Gladio assets for was to basically destroy progressive movements. And I mean that in the traditional sense of the word progressive, working class movements, citizens movements in Italy, Germany, Belgium, etc., all throughout Europe. And stop me if you don't want to hear any of this, but the money that was used to fund those groups, as Libby mentioned, came out of drugs as early as the 40s and the 50s, and they sold it. They through comes out of Southeast Asia, through refined in Corsica, sold by the Italian mob, first exclusively to the black community, which is how you get a lot of people in the jazz community in Harlem addicted to smack, right, to heroin. And the money is then laundered back through a group that they created. The CIA, Mussolini had banned the Masons in Italy. The CIA started them back up, and they called it Propaganda Due. And my dad, who wouldn't talk about anything conspiracy related, I once mentioned the Masons, and he said, "You are a kindergartner when it comes to the Masons. I have a PhD," because he had actually evaded the judge he had just been eating dinner with in Italy had gotten assassinated 5 minutes after they finished lunch. He had to flee Italy, which I learned much later in life. And yeah, Propaganda Due was oh, it's a nutty story. Propaganda Due was this Masonic group, and I guess they just mean by that sort of a secret order, but it was filled with, intelligence, military, banking, church people who weren't supposed to officially be Masons. You're not supposed to be able to be a Mason officially if you're a clergyman in the Catholic Church, but they were there, and of course, American and other intelligence agencies, and basically they ran Gladio. And what was Gladio? It ended up becoming terror attacks on the people of Europe that were funded by drugs sold to Americans. Okay, and so, for instance, the Piazza Fontana bombing in Italy, 1980, the Oktoberfest bombing, 1980 in Germany. There were shotgun attacks in Belgium supermarkets. There were all kinds of things, rigging elections. So, and the funny thing is, and we know about this, there have been BBC documentaries about it. There was a UN investigation. There's actually a really good single one-off film by Thames Television about it, where you've got one of the guys who participated, and they would blame these things on the left, right? And they called it, even though these were not leftist guys, and they called it the strategia di tensione, right? The strategy of tension. And and so you've heard about this, right? You know about this stuff. And so, I mean, to me, like, that's what we're living in now too. I mean, it's a strategy of tension. So anyway, they use drug money to do that. They use drug money to fund these terror attacks. And the funny thing is, one of the guys who was interviewed afterwards, he's in jail. He goes, the funny thing is, these people who hired us, they weren't even fascists. They didn't even believe in the credo of fascism. They believed simply in the centrality of the state, and they don't care left or right. They don't care about all that. They get us, crazy with, like, MAGA, woke, they get us nuts about that shit. But they don't. Power has no ideology. They just do whatever works for them. They'll go communist. They go fascist. They'll go
Wow.
capitalist,
So
democratic.
let
They'll
me,
do
let me,
whatever
okay.
they need to
With
do.
that all being said, I agree with that, by the way. I mean, like, that the Kennedy assassination, going back to that real quick one last time. So with the whole narrative around, the obvious narratives around that, because we just talked about, obviously the drug distribution. They, like you mentioned about that gentleman who painted a picture. It's sort of like how they're painting a picture of, like, again, the lone gunman coming from like Russia with his wife. Like, they talk about the fact that he had a murder weapon of the officer on his holster. He had the gun that he was holding up in the picture. I mean, everything that you could possibly publicly have, like, as evidence would get this guy absolutely screwed. It's sort of like we hear these obvious tales in that certain, like, that way. I'm trying to phrase this question in a way where it would make sense. I think you guys are picking up what I'm putting down, though. How naive we were to believe that back then versus, like, now. I think we're still naive to a certain degree. And what I mean by this whole Charlie Kirk situation, which I don't really like to talk about this case because I don't know too much about it. But I don't know anything about this Tyler Robinson guy. I don't even know what the hell his story is so so fuzzy. There's no clarification like there was with Oswald. So anyways, what I always keep saying, like, in my questions about the obviousness of things. And it's quite obvious with like the drug situations, with, like, Iran Contra, things through history, how they, pardon my language, they're fucking with us, right? But like I said, we're not doing anything about it. It's clear that we know that Lee Harvey Oswald, in my opinion, didn't kill the president. All you have to do is, like, look at the big picture of it. It's clear that there was something that happened to Charlie Kirk. You look at the big picture of that. It's clear that all the events through time, and I'm sorry this is such a long rant here. You get what I'm saying, right? It's kind of it's a blender with a bunch of stuff in it, but I'm sure you guys can actually understand what I'm trying to say.
I, well,
Well, that's,
you go ahead, and then I go.
one of the reasons why they can pull it off and people move on is there's also something called the dull compulsion of the economic. And so every day everybody has to get up and they know they have to pay their bills. And they got to go to work and they got to send their kids to school and they've got to live their lives, and maybe there's something wrong with their mother or an aunt or something like that, and there's just we also have to live our lives. And if you start going down some of these holes, it takes over your life. And so there are people who just they look and they may say, look, I get it, he didn't do it, but I've got to get up and I've got to pay the bills and I got to go to work, and life moves on. And there will be another election in 4 years. And we do forget, by the way, that the framers gave us the power to get rid of the bums. And when we don't vote and we don't participate in the things that are there for us to participate in, whether it's dog catcher, the library committees in libraries, schools, churches, there's all sorts of ways for us to participate and to have our voices heard, and we don't use the power sometimes that was given to us.
But I understand why people don't, and why, like, so someone in your position who's looked at it, or someone like me who's been, having his eyes gradually opened since, from a very young age. But each part was kind of like kicking and screaming, and major part of it was Oliver Stone's JFK. I mean, I remember coming out of that. I was 20 or 21 years old, and I cried in my girlfriend's arms. Like I somehow got it, that what he was saying was true, and that it had incredible significance. So, and then, I went through further evolutions, but, I remember in 93, I was living in the East Village, and, the anarchist paper said FBI bombs World Trade Center right after the first World Trade Center bombing. And I was like, oh, those guys are crazy. That's a bridge too far. Fast forward, and I've worked on a 3-part series on for the Discovery Channel on the CIA as a young, assistant editor, etc., and researcher. And as soon as 9/11 happened, I was just, I was instantly like, oh, that was obviously the state did that. It's like, it's just so clear. And to your point about fucking with us, they do something like World Trade Center Building 7, a 47-story building that just collapses into its own footprint at free fall acceleration at 5:20 in the afternoon without being hit by anything. And for anybody who knows about that, they're basically saying, screw you. What are you going to do about it? It's like, it's kind of, and it's psychologically off-putting because it's so obvious. I actually had a friend of ours who's since died, probably from the recent series of injections. He said to me, he was former head of BBC in New York, and he said, I showed him Building 7, and he was like, I mean, any fool can see that the building is brought down by explosives, and he's like, well, it's so obviously been brought down by explosives that it couldn't have been brought down by explosives, and you're like, what? I mean, it's like, it was so obvious to him therefore if they did do it, they wouldn't have made it so obvious. But just like you said about at the beginning of this conversation about us shooting the president in broad daylight in this obvious fashion, and then the way Vince Solange would say, they obviously weren't investigating. They obviously, you bother to read the Warren Report, you realize they obviously don't give a shit. They're just throwing a bunch of crap at you, Oswald's dental records or his mother's dental records, and then and they're like, look how thorough we were. And, for someone who doesn't want to think about, yes, oh, good, thank God I can
Plus
feel.
here's the other thing. If you start thinking about these things, they've set it up so well that you get marginalized.
Right.
And, as our friend Lewis used to say, when was out ever a better place to be?
Yeah.
A lot of people don't want to be out. A lot of people don't want their friends looking at them at a dinner party saying, oh God, here he goes again with that. They just don't want it. They want to be part of a larger group, and they don't want to start looking at hard realities and have people looking at them
And
funny.
you know what? And I'm just going to say this. That is a nice, safe place to be on the inside, or so it seems, until they convince you to, for instance, take an experimental genetic injection into your body that's going to like alter your chromosomes. Like until that point, it's like, oh, whoops. Oh, I should have been paying more attention. And sadly, a number of people in the Kennedy community wouldn't look at that evidence. So, I mean, the point is that here we are, and this is the situation. And if we don't hear each other on this, and we're like, oh, well, that's a MAGA opinion, I have no association anymore with the left or the right. All of that is a dialectical dumb show. It is, in my view, we slightly disagree. It is a theatrical uh, production, and they love to, as I said before, to get us at each other's throats. And something is going on now that is the culmination of events from the World War II period, with a major milestone at the Kennedy assassination, on through 9/11, through COVID, and whatever is next. I have a feeling is going to make all those things look like Sunday in the Park.
Let's end on a happier note, though.
All right. She doesn't like when I go down that path. But the point is, to your point, if you don't study this history, how are you ever going to be able to understand these other things? Even people who studied this history were fooled by certain recent events. So it's like, but you have to have at least a grounding in some of this to appreciate what's coming. Otherwise, you're just going to be caught blindsided. You're going to be screwed.
Absolutely. So I have John and Libby, the creators of Four Died Trying, and you can follow them at Four Died Trying on X, and you can also check out the documentary on Amazon Prime, YouTube, as well as Apple TV, and Google Play, and you've got your formats out there. And I recommend, like I said to our audience right off the bat, you got to watch it and also they're a wonderful follow on X as well. But so how we usually end our show is we do final takes. So every person who is on the show, usually me, Eli, and our guests, we always do final takes, and we always have the guests do the final takes. So I usually start off first, but I want to thank you both so much. This has been so entertaining, so incredibly, your knowledge, both of you, Libby and John, you guys are amazing, and I'm just grateful to have you on. I hope that we can do a part 2 of this to talk a little bit of Malcolm, and then maybe I know we weren't able to get to the Dorothy Kilgallen story tonight, but I would love to get to that next episode if we could. So. All right, thank you so much. So my final take is for the week, just make sure that Libby brought up a really good point earlier about like how we got to wake up and pay our bills, and we have to, that's what we have to do. But I think the most important thing is that as opposed to like living your life like as an engineer, like a machine every day, that you're kind of operated in a way where you get up, you eat breakfast, you eat lunch, and then you come home, you eat dinner, then you go to bed, and you do it all over again. That's awesome, but your life is really short, and it goes by really, really fast. And you have to leave a print somehow. You have a legacy. It's up to you to leave a legacy, or you could just be somebody that literally is not remembered. And these people that I have on my show tonight, they have a legacy, and they are trying to really make an imprint. And I please support them. It's really super important. So that's my final take of the night.
Well, thank you.
Do you have a final take?
Gosh, my final take would be basically that people should remember what the framers gave us, and exercise your rights to get involved, and get involved on a local level. Think, what's good here in New York City might not be good in Denver, Colorado, or in Sarasota, Florida. And I think that there should a lot to be said for localism, and support your local farmers, small farmers. Look what the farmers are doing in Europe right now. The French farmers have brought the country to a standstill and made Macron back down on an EU policy, and it's happening in Germany and it's happening in Poland, and so people can have a voice and people can do something.
Here, here. Well, I would just say I want to second what you say, Tim, about how we have to be mindful in our lives and not just let them run by. And I think everybody can have an impact, and everybody who educates, if you take a little time. So on the one hand, the people who aren't taking a little time each day to read a book, to watch a documentary, to get, to learn something, are missing a chance and missing an opportunity. On the other hand, it's possible to go too far in the other direction and become, totally immersed and obsessive. And we need to strike a balance between work, learning, and play. And we have to try to do as Libby always manages to do. I'm not this way. She manages to stay positive no matter what. In the years after 9/11, we'd be driving to work, she'd pick me up and we'd go past the trade center site, and I'd just be like, oh God, it's all over. And, they've won, look at what they've done. This is incredible. Everyone's just letting it happen. And she'd say, well, look what's happened, look how far women have come, and, black rights, and we can't enslave children anymore, theoretically. And, and all this, and you had to remind me of, like, there is this arc of history bending toward justice, like King said. And I'd be like, okay, yeah, you're right. It'd be like almost every day I'd have to like go through that, because I just see that site and the new building 7 and the new, oh God, it was terrible. So I think that it's important to create that balance, get involved, healing through activism, healing through learning, and play sometimes, and just forget about it all.
Well, I thank you both for being on, and I look forward to our next episode. Eli will be on with us next episode. You guys will love him. He's awesome. So, John and Libby, thank you so much for doing this. This has been such a treat. And to our audience, the truth is out there. We will see you next episode, and thank you for watching.